Thanks everyone for joining. We put out the invite, I think it was on Wednesday or Thursday, to say, hey, Stephen's in town and let's catch up, do an AMA, bit Q&A and get together for Christmas. So I'm usually the Christmas Grinch and I don't do Christmas parties and I don't do things, and so this is officially our first kind of Christmas gathering now that I'm compromising. So
does that make you Santa?
I think I'm an elf.
I was hoping I was an elf. Damn.
Okay, we could be elves. Just on surfboards and with the, we'll get into that the other conversation after my formal introduction. So thanks everyone for joining us. Stephen's a New York Times best-selling author and an award-winning journalist and the executive director of the Flow Research Collective. He's one of the world's leading experts on human performance. He's the author of 14 books, 11 bestsellers. Most of you will be familiar with from our work with Singularity University and co-authoring Peter Diamandis' books, including The Art of Impossible, The Future is Faster Than You Think, Stealing Fire, The Rise of Superman, Bold and Abundance. His work's been nominated for 3 Pulitzer Prizes, translated into over 50 languages, and has appeared in over 100 publications, including the New York Times Magazine, Wired, Atlantic Monthly, Wall Street Journal, Time, and the Harvard Business Review. Please join me in welcoming Stephen. So most people know who I am here because this is part of the Wavio Singularity community. So you can interview me as well and you can ask me some questions. I did say avoid the surfing questions. So we decided to give Stephen and Ryan a salty welcome to Sydney this morning and went surfing and certainly learnt a few lessons in flow state then. I will actually kick off in asking you a little bit about your background and history and why flow.
How long of an answer do we want? Like, where do you want me to start? Flow came from a couple different places. I became a journalist in the early 90s, and journalism, especially back then, was this crazy career where they would pay you to be curious, which was the weirdest thing to me. I could be curious about things and they would pay me money to go learn about them. And I was really curious about neuroscience and action sports, and they were very unrelated fields, but neuroscience in the early 1990s, we went from what is this cluster of neurons doing to what are emotions, what is questions that were really real, what are altered states of consciousness, all that stuff. I was fascinated, and I was obsessed with action sports, and I was living in Squaw Valley, which is in Tahoe, and if you know anything about action sports in the 1990s, it's often referred to as the era of impossible. More impossible feats, things that were never done before, were never supposed to be done, got done than ever before. And it was so much that stuff that would be impossible on Monday was done on Tuesday, and they were iterating it on it by Friday. And like, you'd never see anything like it. And if you know anything about human performance, especially in the 90s, it was, who are your parents? What schools did you go to? Did you have enough money to get good coaching? Like, this was peak performance in the 90s. That was how you succeeded. And everybody I knew, all the people who were reinventing what was possible, came from broken homes. They had very little education. They had almost no money. They had, as a general, horrific childhoods. And the communities were extremely high risk, a tremendous amount of substance abuse. And normally you put those things together in a community, people die young or go to jail. What they don't do is reinvent what's possible for the human species. So I was witnessing this and going, okay, what the fuck is going on here? And flow was then almost entirely psychological, but I was curious about the neurobiology of it. There was 3 other people in the world at that point who were asking those questions along with me. It was very, even like Csikszentmihalyi himself, the guy who coined the term flow, had zero interest in neuroscience, ever. Like, I could call him or email him and I would get an answer in an hour, any question, unless I asked him about neuroscience, and then it didn't happen. So the field was right for it, and that's sort of how I walked in, and so that was the beginning.
And is that about the same time that you started writing about Navy SEALs as well? And so what's the program with elite performance and flow science of really high level?
It had been, by the time Csikszentmihalyi, so in the 50s, Abraham Maslow was studying success. Now, he's a humanist psychologist, so when he says success, he doesn't just mean material success, he also means you're a good person. But he was studying this huge study group of the most successful people in the world, Eleanor Roosevelt, Albert Einstein, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And up until that point, flow was considered a mystical experience. William James had written about it. It was a spiritual experience, and it was only in religious communities where we thought it showed up. And Maslow does this giant study of the most successful people on earth, and the only commonality they all have is that all found ways to alter their consciousness and put themselves into flow to achieve what they were doing. And the other thing that they had in common is everyone in the study group was an atheist. Just turned out. So suddenly, mystical experiences are gone, peak experiences come next. Csikszentmihalyi came along and said, okay, I'm not interested in elite people, I want to know everybody. So we took the same question of optimal performance, global, and just talked to anybody possibly could, like Navajo sheep herders, Italian grape farmers, elderly Korean women, Japanese teenage motorcycle gangmen, like anybody you could possibly talk to. And flow was what they used to perform the best. So the association with elite performance goes all the way back to Maslow to the 50s. It started to creep in the 90s because the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys used Csikszentmihalyi's book to win 2 Super Bowls and told everybody. And at the exact same time that happened, Tony Blair and Bill Clinton both were reading flow and talking about like flow in the White House, basically. So that was sort of where the SEALs got there. I don't possibly through my work, because it was Rich Diviney who brought flow into the SEALs, and he came in through my work. I'm sure somebody was doing it with the teams before then, but that's as far as like their technological, scientific approach to flow sort of dates to my work, I guess.
Yeah, fantastic. And where do you see it now? Because I think a lot of us have experienced flow. I don't know if you could think of that feeling right now of, for me it's typically doing emails or doing work or doing something with numbers in a spreadsheet, but you just get in the flow of things.
But you're kinky like that.
I'm certainly not going to be a pro surfer. I have been kite surfing. I have experienced flow with kite surfing, and I think that's one of those sports where the kite's just so far away that you need to be completely present and in flow with it, or you're just no good whatsoever. So where do you see it now, and have a lot of people cottoned on to this?
So I'm going to answer it 2 different ways. The first is when I came into flow research, I came in with a guy, Dr. Andrew Newberg, was my first mentor, and he was actually working on, he did the first imaging of Tibetan Buddhists and Franciscan nuns who experienced oneness with everything. And surfers who I was working with were talking about becoming one with the wave. And so I called Andy and I was like, hey, do you think that what you're seeing in the Buddhists is what I'm seeing in the surfers? And he didn't know, and that was sort of where, but I had a conversation with him. This was '96. And I remember saying, do you think we're ever going to solve this? Will we ever figure out the neurobiology of flow? And he said, it's not going to happen in our lifetime. And I agreed with him. And we were some of the world's leading experts back then. And we meaning the Flow Research Collective, published a What Goes On in the Brain in the First 2 Seconds of Flow paper earlier this year that has a complete look at what flow is in the brain, in the body. I mean, I know what your facial expressions do in flow. I know what your micro expressions do in flow. I know what your skin does in flow. I know what your heart rate does in flow. This is stuff I never thought we were going to get there. And we identified 4 different neurobiological signals that show up as we transition into flow in that paper. I didn't think we were going to be there. So that's one half. Like on the scientific front, holy crap. On the where has flow science gone, Flow Research Collective, just randomly, we train Audi, Accenture, Bain Capital, Meta, the SEALs, blah, blah, blah. These are all very mainstream, major companies. What I like to say when I lecture about flow these days is because we know the state can make you 500% more productive if you're going off McKinsey's numbers, self-reported, but seems to hold up pretty well. This is what elite companies are doing. And what I always say is, at this point, if we haven't trained you, we've trained your competition. And if your competition is 500% more productive, who keeps up? Like that's better than AI. This is a huge, enormous advantage. So my goal was always on the training side to build the world's best neuroscience-based flow training and bring it into the heart of the mainstream, really smuggle it into the heart of the mainstream. I don't want to say like mission accomplished, but it's getting pretty close. Like it's shocking at this point. And it's global. We train people in 130 countries. I train people in countries I didn't even know existed.
So half of your books are on human performance and half are on technology. Is that about right? You've got
I mean, there's a bunch of others, but yeah.
A bit of a split there, and I know certainly with the singularity and future is faster than you think, there's a lot of technology. Do you think we'll have a device and sensor picturing augmented reality glasses that'll just be traffic light, red, orange, green, when I'm in flow, when I'm not in flow, and then it'll trigger me to get back into flow. So
yeah, this is what everybody's wanted for a really long time, and we're definitely building a version of that. There's a lot of tech between here and there because there's still no real way. If I want to say you're in flow or out of flow, I'm still measuring network level activity in your brain. We were just talking about this, and you're still like, you're not going to do it with a single channel. Maybe you could do it with a 32 channel EEG at this point, plus a couple other things, like the signal you want. So as we transition into flow, this is crazy, but there's a brain wave called a P300. P means positive, so it's 300 milliseconds after the event. P300, there's an A and a B, because I'm a geek and I have to give you all the technical details. And it's surprise. So that wave shows up with surprise. P300A is novelty. Oh, there's something new. I want to care about that. P300B means I got better than expected results. So what happens in the brain as we transition into flow? You get a series of P300B waves in a row. And we've all had this experience. You're surfing, right? And you pop to your feet and you're like, oh wow, that went better than expected. Get a little, and with each P300 you get dopamine, which is a focusing chemical and drives the brain into flow. And then you make your first turn, you're like, oh shit, that went better than expected. Another one. And you pull onto the wave and make your first, right? And now you're in flow. The problem with that signal is it's really deep in the brain. It's deep in the parietal lobe most of the time, and you're not getting that with EEG, right? It's hard to get with EEG. There are still technological challenges, and something really simple. We wanted to put an EEG device into a helmet so we can do things on athletes in live sports, and they haven't even figured that one out yet, right? Starting to get there, right? We're starting to see the tech, but it's just now. So yes, and will it happen in our lifetime? Yes. Do I think it's going to happen in the next 5 years? Maybe.
We're going to open up to Q&A, and I know that there's certainly, let's go straight in. Just be super loud if you can.
I think it's just right on my brain now. Obviously, visual cues with flow, we've been talking about my eyes. What happens when we go into a virtual reality environment or with goggles?
So the question is, with your eyes and visual cues of recognizing your eyes, what happens when you're in virtual reality?
Does the impact of flow change?
So it's an open question. There's a whole body of literature in media studies where they call flow presence. So if you're looking for this, you won't find it. Well, you'll find some stuff under flow more recently, but it was mostly under the term presence, which talks about flow in an online environment, that sort of stuff. That's the term that they use. There are changes. I'll give you an example. This is not, so there's 28 known flow triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. One of the ones that I've known exists for years, but we haven't proved it yet, is frame rate past the eyes and field of vision. If you've ever ridden a mountain bike, if you ride a mountain bike across wide open fields at 50 miles an hour, you're not in flow, but if it becomes single track, instant flow. As soon as you enter the woods, and this is really common for mountain bikers. It's because the field of vision shrunk and there's a certain frame rate past the eyes that your brain goes, oh, this is a high stress situation, drop them into peak performance. VR is probably great for testing that, but that's gonna, field of vision is good, like all those things are going to shift in a mediated environment, and because the original core work on just what frame rate hasn't been done. So the answer is yes, changes a lot. How exactly, we don't know. We are partnered with Jump, which is probably the best VR consumer experience you can have, right? You can go wingsuit base jumping. And so we've partnered with them, and I think we're gonna start doing research right around Christmas. So we'll start getting some of those answers, and ask me in a year, we'll have a paper out, I think, hopefully.
So what are the flow blockers? And think of it as the no-no list for everyone that we're going to share.
So I don't think there is a no-no list. Actually, there are a couple things on the no-no list that are interesting that I'll start with. Distraction is, there's a whole bunch of obvious ones, but what popped into my head first, just because it's this room, Ritalin, Adderall, all the smart drugs that people are taking and people's kids are taking, they're all flow blockers, completely. It's fake flow. Anybody who thinks it's like people who are on cocaine. If you've ever had an experience where you've talked to somebody on coke, they think they're in flow, they think they're brilliant, right? But your experience is not that, right? Like on the other end of that, that's the same thing with Adderall and Ritalin. Those are fake flow states, and they jack up the amount of norepinephrine in the brain, so they'll block flow. Distraction is number one, right? For sure. But the challenge skills balance, which is flow's main trigger, which says flow follows focus, right? You want more flow in your life, it always follows focus. The golden rule of flow, the challenge skills balance, says we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task slightly exceeds our skill set, right? You want to stretch, but not snap. You want to put a number on that, just for kicks and giggles. Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, sat down with a Google mathematician about 10 years ago and came up with 4% difference between challenge and skills. And we hammered on that number for a while. It's almost impossible to test. I think it is impossible to test. But we, again, came up and said, wow, we've got the best anecdotal data in the world that says this is true, but we still don't know how to test it. But my point is that if you actually dig under, what do we mean by skills? What do we mean by challenge? There are 9 different variables. Confidence, for example. So you're asking about flow blockers. I can talk about the major ones, distraction, things like that, but they're super individual based on that challenge skills balance and what it takes for you to maximize focus.
What are your thoughts on the mental health pandemic at the moment?
I don't think there is one. I think that's a misnomer.
Agree.
I think that's a joke.
Why?
Because people are healthier mentally than they've ever been. They've just, I can keep my mouth shut on that. Yes.
I'm really fascinated where the future is going, and if I may, back in the day it was a little woo-woo, etc. But nowadays I'm hearing people talk about astro travel, manifestation, bending reality, etc. What's your understanding of where the science could go in the future with the heightened levels?
I don't think any of the words you just spoke mean anything. You might have just said magic fairy dust, right? Like, I don't think those words mean anything in the way that most people are using them. I'm not saying there are not phenomenon attached to those words that are real and worth looking at, but the way most people are using those words, you want to have an out-of-body experience? I can stimulate your temporal parietal junction and give you one. I can do it in virtual reality without doing that. In fact, I had one the other day because I took ketamine and was on a vibrating bed platform doing ketamine therapy. And if you take ketamine on a vibrating bed, you will have an out-of-body experience. Which is where that was when my work started. I had an out-of-body experience the first time I went skydiving when I was 17, and I went, what the fuck was that? Was that? And so that was how I got to know Andrew Newberger's work on Tibetan Buddhists. I came in wanting to know about the neurobiology of mystical experience. So where do I think that, what I do think is interesting though, is we are now finding how to technologically, pharmacologically, and even just basic human performance, right? Most of the really, sacred experiences, right? Stuff that was forever couched deeply within religious traditions and things like that now has been broken free and can be mediated through a lot of technology. Where is that going to lead? I have no idea. That's a really wild question, right? Because we've got, I don't know how many millions of years of, or hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution where God was a thing, but our experience of God wasn't that direct and immediate, or you had a special role within the tribe and that was your job, and now it's all of us and all the time also, which is really a wild thing. So I don't know where it's going to go. I think it's really cool and I think it's exciting. I don't think that, do I think somebody's going to discover the secret is real? No, I don't. I don't. No, maybe it is. Right? Maybe it is, but I'm not betting on it.
I have a slide with the 6 megatrends in technology at the moment.
Okay.
I'd love to ask your thoughts on some of them. The
Yeah.
first one's AI. So you're doing a lot of work in AI. What do you think is going to be the biggest impact that it has probably in the next year, but then also in the next 5 years?
I don't think AI is real yet, other than ChatGPT is not a real tool for if you want to do factual research or any of the things that people are claiming. We talked about this today. Is it a phenomenal tool for creativity? Oh my God, it's the most amazing creative tool ever. It's like having the greatest creative partner in the world. So I think from a creativity and innovation standpoint, it's fantastic. From the real advancements that we're talking about at the mass level, I don't think we're going to see in 5 years. Now, are we seeing it? We saw what happened with AI and healthcare during COVID, right? It only took a couple years of concentration on, that. And so I'll give you an example. In the next 5 years, healthcare and food technology and food science are essentially the same thing, right? You're doing different things, but you're essentially manipulating biology and getting to the same place. So the COVID revolution that was AI-driven, healthcare revolution, is now bleeding into food technology and agri-tech and things like that. So that's where I'm saying, oh wow, this is gonna be really interesting. But as far as all the claims, this is the front end of the Gartner hype cycle, right? I don't believe we're gonna see these innovations for 20 years. I think we're being, lied to again and again and again, because I've watched it so many times. How many different VR is here? Right? Is VR here yet, by the way? Can we say it's here? I don't think it's here, right? And I was hanging out with Jared Lanier in the early 90s, and it was supposed to be there then, you know what I mean? So 3D printing is 30 years old, and it's still, we were writing abundance, and we really thought it was going to be everywhere within 5 years, and it hasn't, because adoption rates are generational, and that doesn't change. So you have to have a generation of people die off and have a new bunch of natives of the new technology to come up. That hasn't changed. So until that changes in some significant level, I don't believe the predictions people make. I could be wrong, but that's just what I've seen. And for 30 years I've been looking at this and writing about it, right? I'm not saying I'm an expert or the expert or anything like that, but that's what I've seen over 30 years.
It's almost like the internet was going to take all of our jobs, and this internet, and it existed and it was a tool, and similar.
I was in San Francisco in the 90s, right? And if you talk to anybody in the 90s about the internet, it was going to save the world. And this was at a time that it was like home shopping and pornography distribution, right? That was what the internet was in the 90s. And everybody's like, it's going to save the world. And you're like, really? When? Because all you're doing is downloading porn.
It certainly opened up a lot of information now.
It changed,
now that it's been
but
20, 30 years.
20 years later,
Yeah.
Did it change the world? Fuck yeah. But did it take 20 years? It did. And this is the most powerful communication technology we'd ever seen, right? So adoption rates are based on what technologies you're native with and what you're willing to learn as an adult. I think learning rates may change, right? I think adult learning is starting to really change, and we're getting better at that, so that may speed that up a little bit. But that's how I think about it. I could be completely wrong, right?
Yeah.
And I know this is not a popular SU attitude to have towards technology, but it's what I've seen again and again and again.
I guess it then becomes a competitive advantage for those who are using it to their
Huge.
and
Huge.
using it well.
Yeah.
Who's using ChatGPT or AI on a regular basis? Most people in this room. I know in one of your AI training courses you talk about the super mega prompts and all of these really tactical and incredible tools to help people leverage AI, and that certainly I enjoyed. And since then we've made a number of talk to a PDF. There's a company we're looking at investing in that are doing only talk to published scientific research papers, which could be game changing if you're actually after some information that is only in this body of information, and you can ask that questions. And I think there's
that stuff
things
is
like
great.
that.
That stuff is great, and those niche uses are phenomenal. I just want to know how long. Right. The question is how long till it changes the world. That's what you asked me.
I'm not sure it's going to change the world. I just think, what do you see happening at the moment? So, have you been using it to write any books?
Yes.
How?
So I'll give you, this was the example I gave you this morning. So I'm writing a new novel. One of the things in the novel is I hid a binary code in Stonehenge. So if I were to try to do that normally, the amount of research, it would have taken 3 months worth of research to figure out how to do what I did with ChatGPT in an hour, right? So for creativity, like that stuff is amazing. It's astounding. I've never seen anything like it. That's just one example. So for writing science fiction, ChatGPT is the bomb.
Yeah.
But science fiction, emphasis on fiction.
Any more questions?
I'm curious, you mentioned flow's not flow, potentially. All flow's not different, or is it all the same in every brain on the planet? It follows a very specific pathway that is repeatable. In other words, you could use technology if it's a repeatable thing to repeat it. Or my experience with, so looking at those 3D mazes, the moment I start to consciously think about it, it breaks out. And my experience of flow is the same. If I go, oh shit, I'm having this, or in meditation, if I'm really conscious of like, this is going ballistic, and why don't I go for more of it? And then suddenly I lose it, and then I go to chase it again, and it disappears. So if you had microdosing or psychedelics, that's one form of plant technology, or you could have internet wearable technology that we manufacture. What's going to produce the most consistent flow state?
So
to repeat the question then,
Yes.
is flow, and is that then repeatable? If you follow a same process every time, can you trigger flow every time in the same way?
Developing a technology, wearable technology, enhance or hinder flow states based on it usually coming, or we haven't developed technology that allows us to get in.
So flow is flow tautologically, meaning flow is that's a scientific term. It describes a very specific thing in the brain. Stealing Fire, which was a book I wrote about all the north of happiness experiences, trance states, psychedelic states, meditative states. There's a wide variety of altered states that are all north of happy. Very few of them have been extremely well researched besides flow. So flow is a very specific thing in the brain. And it seems like there are cultural differences in flow, there are male-female differences in flow. They're not huge across the boards. The triggers are pretty consistent. Which triggers you want to use is very individual. So which ones you're going to be susceptible to, very individual. You have to, it's an experimental process. I'm not saying we can't get there technologically, but you're going to need different on-ramps for different people at different points in life, right? Like when you were a teenager, risk was probably a great flow trigger for you. In your 50s, is risk the same flow trigger for you, right? So for me it is, but it's because I'm not right in the head. But so yes is the answer, but there's still going to be a bunch of individual stuff that's going to vary, and it can vary, where that challenge skills balance is, for example. I'll just give you a really tactical example. So when I'm starting a book, I want to write 500 words a day. That's when I'm starting a book. 350 words I can write in my sleep. I usually have to make a transition between ideas around 350 words to get to 500. That's harder. So it stretches me. I don't snap. When I'm tired, it's 400 words or 300 words, right? When I've got a tremendous amount of energy and a bunch of ideas, it's 700. It's a moving target that's going to change on a daily basis. So, and you're asking somebody we don't do technology and we don't do substances at the Flow Research Collective, because I want to be able to get into flow and perform my best no matter the circumstances.
Does that include caffeine?
No, that actually doesn't include caffeine. Though, and we have all this new work coming out on how caffeine is a phenomenal flow trigger too.
There was actually an incredible email that you shared, and your email list mail outs are brilliant, and it was how to use caffeine. Effectively.
Yeah, we've got a huge paper coming out in neuroscience and biobehavioral reviews sometime in the next 2 months on caffeine as a flow trigger. So very effective flow trigger. I don't really worry about being able to get a cup of coffee, by the way. Like that's not a concern to me. But so and by the way, that's just a personal bias, right? Like this is a personal bias, and this is the way I want to run my company. I don't want anybody I train to have to rely on something outside their brain and what's inside them to get into flow. But that's just, how I'm approaching it.
Adam?
Yeah, I've just got a question for you. Stephen, when you talk about
Adam, will you shout for me?
when you talk about going into flow,
Yes, sir.
My question is, and maybe I'm wrong in my understanding of it, but going into flow, it seems like if you do all these trigger points or things that work for you, you can create that state. So my question is that using the brain that you have, just a certain process to get into that flow? And my question is, what's the expansion of the brain, like psychedelics and stuff which this guy was talking about now? How do you, is that expanding or using a part more of your brain that you haven't used before? So flow, is it using a process to use what existing use? And how do you expand it beyond that?
So there was a misnomer. You're actually referencing what's known as the 10% brain myth. It was something William James wrote that Dale Carnegie, not even Dale Carnegie, the guy who wrote the foreword to Dale Carnegie's book, or the afterword, misquoted William James. So the idea was we only use a small portion of our brain, so flow, optimal performance must be the full brain on overdrive, and it's actually backwards. So when we drop into flow, we're not actually using more of the brain, we're using a lot less of the brain. Huge swatches of the brain are turning off, and the brain is repurposing that energy for focus and attention. So why does time pass so strangely in flow, for example? A large portion of your prefrontal cortex turns off in flow. Time is a calculation performed all over the prefrontal cortex, and when parts of that network go down, you lose your ability to separate past from present from future, and you have that eternal now, the elongated present time dilation experience. Same thing with your sense of self-consciousness. Why does that disappear in flow? Because it's a calculation performed all over the prefrontal cortex, which shuts down in flow. So we're not using more of the brain. That's a misnomer. But the other half of your statement, we actually just proved this. It hasn't been published, and we're the first people to be able to prove this, but we measured the information content in the brain during flow versus boredom conditions, overwhelm conditions, and flow. So challenge skills balance with boredom on one end, overwhelm on the other, and flow in the middle. And I can now tell you definitively that there's higher information in the brain during flow. So the difference between flow and psychedelics, I don't even know how to do this easily, but essentially when you're on psychedelics, the brain starts making random connections all over the place. All over the place. It's no barrier. It flattens hierarchies in the brain, but connections go everywhere. In flow, you see the same thing, but it's a very limited field of experience. So like, we went surfing today. When I'm surfing and in flow, my brain is totally fired up, and those networks are really robust, but it's literally the networks I use for surfing because it's task-specific focus. So massive heightened creativity inside a tight window is what happens in flow. Psychedelics are just connections everywhere. Does that make sense? Was that helpful?
I've got a couple of questions. Up the back here first.
My name's Heath. Steve, thanks. It's been a great chat. I really enjoyed it. I think about all the times that I've been in flow, and I've come from the creative industry, so I've been creative director for a long time, advisor and whatever. I play music, and when I was at school, I played a lot of sport. So I think about all those times that I'm in flow, and they tend to be kind of this old monkey brain, you know, things that are really innate rather than learned. So it's sport, it's creativity, and I feel like I'm in those. Have you sort of researched musicians versus, I mean, Lisa talked about when she's in a spreadsheet, she can get in flow. I've never been in that stage.
Yeah, so you're raising a funny point. Are you done? Did I cut you off?
With the creativity, I get there, right? And with things that I guess are innate. So I feel like I'm using an older part of my brain that's not right rather than learned.
That's an interesting point.
So I think
I guess, I mean, I guess you technically are using an older part of the brain because the prefrontal cortex does shut down and flow large swatches of it, so you are using deeper brain, older structures. I guess you could say that. So the reason you get into flow writing, for example, and the reason she gets into flow doing spreadsheets are actually the same. It's because pattern recognition triggers dopamine in the brain. And pattern recognition is underneath both spreadsheets and writing. So same commonality, very different manifestation when they come into the real world. It's actually, the fact that flow is massively associated with creativity and sport is, you can blame me and Mike, Chick Sent Me High, because both of us were writers and action sport athletes. And we're the two people who made flow the most popular, and both of us, Chick Sent Me High started out as a rock climber and a mountaineer. In fact, the last question I asked him before he died was to like come clean and tell me how much of a role that early stuff played in his flow stuff, because he always tells these stories about concentration camps and watching people play chess and creativity with artists, and I was like, Mike, you were a rock climber in the 60s when nobody knew what the fuck rock climbing was, and you were getting into crazy flow states and wanted to explain it. And you can't go into an academic world and be like, I'm climbing rocks and seeing God, and I'd like to research that. So, right? Suddenly we're gonna talk about artists or, blah, blah, blah. But no, this is some of the early work. The most common flow state on earth is reading, by the way. And when Mike did his early work on flow, the most common flow state he found outside of reading was middle managers in conversation at work, believe it or not. So middle managers, because they're high enough up that there's risk. So there's a lot of flow triggers basically in those conversations. So, and by the way, when I came into this work, I was with you. Like that was my experience with flow, and I was a creative and an athlete, and that's what I thought too. And it really took me a long time to sort of start to understand, oh no, it really is everybody's optimal performance. It shows up in anywhere, in anyone, provided certain initial conditions are met.
Rich?
Stephen, Rich, great surfing with you this morning.
Thank you. Rich, do you want to introduce yourself maybe like 3 more times to me? Because I don't think I have it yet. But if you'd like. No? Okay.
I love it. Thank you. You just touched on a really interesting topic, which was sort of, well, maybe, but from boredom to flow to overwhelm. And I think a lot of the conversations often from getting from boredom to flow. But that getting from overwhelm back to flow feels like it's less discussed in my understanding of your work or otherwise. But any tips on what that looks like? Because that's the thing
Yeah, by the way, that's so we're in Australia, so this is an appropriate question. There's an Australian researcher, Christian Swan, and we disagree, but he has spent his entire career studying a state he calls clutch, which is flow plus stress. And doesn't push you into overwhelm. So he's become the expert on how do you not get into overwhelm. So a lot of that actual work it was done here in Australia. I sort of feel like that's a lot of what we deal with, because most of our clients, right, are executives, and what they deal with the most is burnout. And burnout is an overwhelm state. Right, we want to down-regulate your nervous system. So I think that work is being done. It's just not being talked about in those terms. But we do massive amounts of work on burnout, and I think a lot of other researchers do. And no magic fairy dust. You want to get out of overwhelm? Breath work, right? Reframing. Like the old tools work really, really well. Marijuana.
It's coming, okay, changing gears. It's coming to the end of the year, and Australia closes down over Christmas. We all go surfing for 6 weeks and don't do any work, which is fantastic. What's your goal setting process like? I know you cover a lot in the art of impossible. Do you have an actual annual rhythm that you do, or what is your personal process for goal setting?
For goal setting?
Yeah.
I don't have an annual rhythm because I rarely have annual goals. I work on big goals, right? I want to write a book. And I don't tend to put time limits. Unless I sell something and I have to, I won't put time limits on it.
Can you share the big I of impossible and the little I?
Oh, sure. There's just, when you research the impossible, right, there's two kinds of impossible to do. Capital I is that which has never been done before, and small I, which I write about in The Art of Impossible, which is those things I thought were impossible for me. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a Midwest farm community basically, and I wanted to be a writer. And it was, I might have woken up one day and said, Mom, Dad, when I grow up I want to be an elf. Right, I knew how to become a writer, and I didn't know any writers. I didn't know how you be, right? It was impossible, but it was a small I impossible, right? And as a general, what I've noticed, even among people who go after capital I impossible, very few people set out for a capital I impossible. Peter Diamandis was the private race into space, and even then, most people thought it was a capital I impossible, but if you knew the science then, it was small I, and that's what Peter knew, and that's why the X Prize worked, right? But one thing that seems really, really clear to me is you get to capital I impossible by going after small I impossible after small I impossible, right? You just push yourself to, oh, I did that, what else can I do? I did that, and usually capital I impossible ends up being just what happens along the way. It becomes really, really incidental. But this was something we talked a lot about, and I talked a lot about in Rise of Superman, and a lot of the athletes in that book talked a lot about this. You see it in action sports, and I think you see it in entrepreneurship these days, which is people are getting really good at going after the impossible, right? It's gone from capital I impossible across the boards to, oh no, this is what we do, right? This is how we set goals for ourselves, and this is what we go after. That's a big shift, right? That's a shift that's happened over the past 25 years, I want to say. Technology, human performance, all these things have come together to enable it, but that's really neat to me. You ask, what's different? What do I look at in the future? And I'm like, oh, that. So, can I make exact tech predictions? No. But can I tell you we're going to get more of that? Yes.
And what's on your goals list, on your little I? Do you have a list?
5 books. I've got anybody who knows me knows that I want to be the first outsider collective to win a Nobel Prize. So that's the goal of the Flow Research Collective has been the same. I want the best peak performance training in the history of the universe, and I want to be the first collective to win a Nobel Prize.
Amazing. Well done.
Can I
Sim?
ask you the same question, Lisa, about your goals and how you do
Yeah, please. I can give you huge goal setting information, but mine are a little.
How do you do it, Lisa?
Oh, I'm OCD, and I'm not sure if you're asking me that question because you know that I'm OCD. So thank you. I certainly do have an annual goal setting
Do you
process.
have a
I
goal
think
matrix that you build?
Oh, absolutely.
Fabulous.
So there's 7 areas of life. So, you know, spiritual, health
amazing.
and fitness, financial, friends and family, relationship and growth. And one more that
Put it in a spreadsheet now.
in each of those, it's definitely in a spreadsheet. I actually rate how I'm feeling about each of them. I used to do it weekly, it's more monthly now. And so if I'm out of 10, if I'm a 5, what do I need to do this month to become a 10? And then set all those other little goals.
That's
so
awesome.
I'm like
That's
super
phenomenal.
obsessed. I'm actually, and I love your work because I am looking at how do you actually set goals from cradle to grave of what you're physically and mentally capable of doing. So if I want to be a pro skier, and I think that was in one of your books, I'm like, I should have done it when I was a teenager, not when I'm now 40. So, you know, how do you actually line up all those things that you want to do in life? And I think this is what a lot of younger people struggle with at the moment, and education's great, but it's still 30 years to learn, 30 to earn, 30 to give back. How do we give them all their options of all the goals they might want to do in time? And so if the best time to go to space on Virgin Galactic or any of the commercial space flights is going to be before you turn 40, then they should know about that. So how do we actually list our goals in our entire lifetime and then weekly check in and rate yourself and make sure that you're on track? Do you think that we could actually do it over a lifetime?
So why don't you ask me about the dangers of goal setting now?
Great. What are the dangers of OCD
I'll
goal
give you an
setting?
example. I'll give you an example that, and you're gonna. So I'm a huge, as you know, I'm a huge believer in goal setting. But I'll give you an example from my own life. Recently, I had an experience. I had an experience where for about a month it was very hard to breathe, and I had to breathe consciously. So essentially, I spent about a month in a living meditation retreat where I had to focus on my breath to just breathe. And one of the things I started to notice, because I had full access to my internal monologue at a level that I don't normally do, one night I got up to go brush my teeth. And instead of going to brush my teeth, I went to the bathroom first, and I was putting laundry in the laundry, and I was yelling at myself in my head for not accomplishing the goal of brushing my teeth. And I started to realize, and I was talking to Dr. Ellen Langer, who's brilliant, and we were having this very conversation about goal setting. And it's one of the things that people don't talk about in goal setting theory is that when you get really good at it, and I write about the habit of ferocity, I write like all of it. What I'm starting to realize is that there's internal consequences that you have to be really well aware of. And one of the other things about goal setting that is really problematic as well is we get locked into habits. So it's not just that we set goals, we start to do the same things over and over and over in the exact
I've
same
scheduled
way.
my habits.
Right, exactly.
We get little notifications.
All good things. All good things for productivity and performance, not phenomenal for mental health and happiness. So, for example, Ellen recommends, and I'm in agreement with her at this point, that whenever you notice yourself doing a habit that is not fundamental in that way, like going to the bathroom. Do you go to the bathroom always the same way? Like all really simple stuff. She says, no. As soon as you notice the habit, notice 3 new things in the environment immediately, as soon as you can. You don't have to break the habit, but you have to break the routinization of the habit because of what it does to your brain and the impact that has on health and well-being over a lifetime. I will also tell you that you're OCD and you came up as an accountant, and if you were a scientist you'd be a physiologist, and there's this very specific thing you do that works for you. And one of the things I try very hard to teach people It's why I have a science-based company and I don't do psychology and I do neurobiology. What works for you is not going to work for me. That's what the science shows us again and again and again. So could you create this map that you want? Yes. Is it going to work for people who are OCD, like numbers, and yeah, it probably will. Is it going to work for me? No, probably not. Right.
You train the AI bots to
maybe
tell your glasses to check yourself.
But you're going to need
yourself.
32 channel EEG first. It's got to be portable too.
Yeah, no, that's actually really interesting because I am very OCD and I think I get so much.
Too. Yeah, I am
in
too.
the
I'm wired.
of it.
Yeah, I'm wired that way as well. I'm teasing you, but I'm wired that way too. And I was like, it's really, and I was the biggest. I've been a huge goal-setting person. I love the power of goals. You need it in your motivational stack, but there's a downside, and it's under-researched. Ellen's the only person I know who's actually talking about it at all, because you don't want to fuck with goal-setting theory. People love it. It's a sacred cow.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I am going to try and shake things up. I'll think of my new word of the year for next year. This year was focus, and it certainly served me well. I did actually even warn. I think that's part of the people that are closest to you in your circles as well, and they know you so well. And Christina is great for that as a business partner. I told her I'm just like a puppy. I need to be taken for walks because I don't get out of my normal routine. So next year we're actually going for drop-in friends, people that surprise you, get you out of your routine. So certainly we'll let you know my new word that's going to be completely sporadic or spontaneous.
Narcolepsy. May I suggest narcolepsy?
Is that something I want to manifest in my life? Now that I'm getting a little bit schooled, I'm going to start to call drinks break.
Ryan, can we get some alcohol over here?
Yes, actually, we're going to get some more drinks. My final question, I guess, is what do you see the future like in 20 years? So you've just woken up, it's 20 years in the future. What does the world look like?
So I don't know, and I've always said I'm not a futurist. I work with a lot of futurists at SU. SU's got futurists. I don't do that work. I tend to work in the present. I tend to look at the trends that are going on now, and 20 years is a long time in a highly accelerated environment, but will I guess? I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be like in 20 years.
Will you wake up, you'll still want to go for a surf, you'll still want to do all of these things?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll have the ability to rewatch your dreams in the morning.
You will. I mean, so the things that I'm thinking about, what can I point at and go, so obviously, longevity is going to be, right? What's interesting about 20 years from now is there are going to be a lot of people alive on the planet who wouldn't have been alive today, right? Things like that, I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, this is a huge change in the population, right? And if we tap into it, it's a huge change in our access to wisdom as well, which is really exciting to me. Those things I think about. I don't know. Where's my flying car?
Yeah, I certainly would
Where's
like to
my
do the
goddamn
air.
flying car?
Better be here by 20 years.
Didn't I write about that in Faster?
Yeah.
I'm after an Iron Man suit, but I'll be like Pepper in the Iron Man suit. I want rocket boots and Jarvis.
Because
And then
that's
I'll be
going to be
happy.
a good thing for
I'll
humanity.
be like surfing airwaves. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Where do you think the world's going to be in 20 years? What's your prediction?
I would love that we have enough devices and sensors, and I think we're going from 50 billion devices and 1 trillion sensors in 2020 to 500 billion devices and 100 trillion sensors in 2030, is that we can actually help people show up as their best selves. And so utilising technology, you'll have visual recognition that'll understand when you're away from your baseline of happiness and help with those triggers to get you into a better state. Or it might recommend that I go surfing or that I go kite surfing or that I write. What's the best time of day that I'm going to write my 500 words? So I think certainly augmenting humans so that we can show up as our best selves would be incredible. And I also think almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think he was researching instead of self-actualizing and then moving in and out of, you don't just self-actualize, you move in and out.
Can I ask
of
you a question?
self-actualization.
Why don't you think you have access to all that information now? Why do you think you need technology for that?
Because I'm too busy to see to check in, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I could.
I think you could too.
Yeah. Am I lazy that I would like the devices and sensors to do it?
No, you like squirrels.
I chase squirrels. I love a good squirrel.
Me too.
Yeah.
But it's a question I ask people a lot when they're telling me technology. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I'm a big tech guy. I like it, but I often wonder when it comes to human performance, and the same reason I gave you shit, right? Is I'm not saying bad, but I'm saying, wait a minute, we have all this equipment inside ourselves. I mean, isn't that the Buddhist whole point? Like, didn't we make this point 5,000 years ago? Like, so that's what I wonder about. And I also wonder if we have that many sensors. Again, Peter doesn't care about privacy because he's never broken the law. I grew up differently than Peter, so I care a lot about privacy, and I think about 1,000,000,000,000,000 sensors, and I think, ooh, I don't like that. I don't like that amount of control, and I don't like being watched that much. And half my friends would be in jail right now if that existed.
Yeah, it will be a very different population. I certainly hope Web3 can enable us to maintain privacy, and who can see us. I think there's a Black Mirror episode where you can blur people out, where you can just blur yourself out if you don't want anyone to know what you're up to. It would be cool. So maybe we'll have a lot more fun in 20 years. There'll be flying cars, there'll be rocket boots, and I certainly won't be working so much next year after our conversation now, tapping into that flow state. So sorry everyone, Merry Christmas.
So I thank you for putting this together, and thank you for hosting. That was awesome.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.